Virtual machines are a fun way to explore Linux without having to dual boot your entire system or do anything that would otherwise compromise your usability of your device. In this tutorial, I will be installing Kali Linux, which is a Debian-based Linux distribution, mostly used for penetration testing, on a virtual machine to demonstrate just how easy it is to do. So without further ado, let's get started. The first thing you have to do is download the Kali Linux ISO. That would be the bootable file that would be used to actually install something onto your device. So while this is downloading, let's get our virtual machine set up. By now you should have already downloaded either VMware, or I would recommend VirtualBox because it is free and because, well, it's free. That's basically all you really need. So what I have over here is I have a virtual machine semi set up for Kali Linux. Being that it is a Debian distribution, I will put on Debian 64-bit. Most operating systems nowadays are 64-bit. If you happen to download the 32-bit one, then set it to 32-bit, but you should be downloading, as I'm showing here, the 64-bit distribution of Kali Linux. So, as a matter of fact, let's remove this and let's start it totally from scratch. Delete all files. Good. So new, I will call this one Kali, just because it's Kali Linux. It's a Linux distribution, so I will start off with that. It is a Debian distribution, so I will select Debian 64-bit. Next, you have to allocate some of your system RAM. While the virtual machine is running, it is operating under your system memory, as everything else is, and it can take quite a bit. So what you would want to do right now is you want to find out what your minimum system requirements are for running Kali Linux. In that case, you just Google search that. That shouldn't be too problematic. Kali Linux minimum requirements to run. And it should show the minimum requirements right here. And it can operate on as little as 512 megabytes. Though they do recommend that for the GNOME desktop environment and all that other stuff that you really don't need to know, but because we will be running the full 64-bit version, they say at least 2 gigabytes of RAM and 20 gigabytes of disk space. So I'm actually going to give it 4 gigabytes because I have 32 available, so I can sacrifice 4 gigabytes of memory. And then we're going to create our virtual hard disk. You need this. It's a virtual disk that is aimed at providing the same service as a regular hard drive would do. We're going to dynamically allocate this, so it will change its capacity based on how much you're actually using, and we're going to give it 20 gigabytes of space. And it doesn't want to do this right now, so that's fine. That's all well and good. Just change that to 20 gigabytes. So now it has 20 gigabytes of space allocated to the drive. Created. Good. Now, because the Kali is not yet finished downloading, we have to make a couple of system changes. Number one, we want to dedicate a certain amount of processing cores. The minimum is 2 processing cores to run this distribution. I would run, because I have 12 processing cores, 4, just for smooth operation, but for now we'll just allocate 2 because that is the minimum that it requires. You don't have to worry about anything else. Go to your video memory and allocate 120 megabytes of video space. Enable 3D acceleration so that it can run 3D things like videos and other 3D applications. The storage is already set up over there, as you can see, and we are downloaded with our Kali Linux distribution. Take note of the file location, okay, properties, and we'll just set this up just like this. Now you want to go to the IDE controller over here. It says IDE controller. It just means what's going to be the disk that you want to use for it. Choose your virtual optical disk file. It's in downloads, as we can see, downloads. And just scroll down until you see Kali Linux. There it is. Open that file. Okay, hit OK. Everything looks good right now. If you want to make some extra networking things, like you have another network adapter, like you want to do a bridge adapter or something fancy like that, you can take the time to do that now, but attaching it to the NAT is going to be just fine. You can also double check to make sure that you have the correct stuff going on. There's a lot you can do with this. It's a lot simpler than I'm making it sound right now. This is just to show you the options that you have. I'm going to enable the USB 3 controller because I do have that installed, but that is not necessary. Okay? And now, very simply, hit start. And right now, the virtual machine is creating a virtual environment for you to install Kali Linux. This Kali Linux can be run as a live CD, which we don't want to do. We want to install it. Go to install and install like you would any other operating system. See? Ignore all these things that it has to say over here. That's just silly stuff going on. It should not take very long to install at all. There we go. It's detecting the virtualized hardware. Detecting link on Ethernet connector host 0, that's going to be your standard Ethernet, so it's actually doing a live update at the same time. It has already auto-configured everything. The host name we will leave as Kali. Domain name, don't even worry about it. And this is just for, and the root password, we're just going to make password. Okay, re-enter to verify, password. Okay, select your time zone. Okay, and use the entire disk. Of course, see 21 gigabytes of the VirtualBox hard disk. That's perfectly fine. In one partition, finish partitioning and write changes to disk. That's okay. Write these changes to disk. It's perfectly fine. It's going to take a second to install the system. And this always takes a while to do because it is actually installing a fully functional operating system on a device that is virtualized. So to take a moment to explain what a virtualized system is, basically the software pretends like there's separate computer hardware running as its own system. It's basically an imaginary system that software has created that you can run other operating systems on. You can run anything from Windows to Mac to various distributions of Linux. You can even connect them together to make a type of small server, which I've attempted before, miserably failed at. But it's harder to do when it's virtualized. Sorry, did I say server? I meant network. The server would be part of said network. So while this is downloading, keep in mind only 2 cores are actually being utilized, but you can see in the task manager, you can see via performance that 2 cores are in fact being used, and that memory is being allocated quite actively to the virtual machine. And this could obviously take just a while, so what we're going to do is we're just going to speed up through it, and when it's done, we will come back to it and I'll show you how to finish it up. Kali Linux does work as a method of penetration testing. I will add. It does work as a method of penetration testing to an existing system, and it's a way of doing so without actually having to have another physical system, built up and, penetration testing separately. So once it's that makes a lot more sense if you're a little more savvy. But this video is for the new user, and I'm gonna basically just cut out to the next part right now, so that we don't spend too much time ranting. Another cool thing about virtual machines is that you can have several of them running at the same time. So if I wanted to run Ubuntu at the same time, or Fedora at the same time as I'm running Kali, I can do that. That is totally acceptable. And another great part about virtualizing the system versus dual booting, in addition to being able to run an operating system within another operating system, is the fact that nothing you do to this virtual machine can actually harm your device. So that's one of the reasons that virtualizing these things are much preferred, especially for the practicing enthusiast or soon to be more technically inclined user. I suppose I'm not going to really speed it up too much. You can speed it up a little bit as you will. Meanwhile, I'm just going to check my OBS settings. Kind of see where I'm going with that output. Okay. And it is scaling it out to 720p resolution. That's good. I like that. Okay. This is not completed. There it is, network mirror, and use a network mirror, that's totally fine. Scanning the mirror, it's retrieving files, it's updating everything. Kali Linux is a bit more of an advanced Linux distribution. It is used for penetration testing and for what some might call hacking, though there is an ethical and legal thing with that, so you just want to kind of keep that in mind, that you can't do certain things. You're just kind of not allowed to. Yes, always install the grub bootloader to the master boot record. Select the hard disk, that'll be this. Update. And once this installation is finished, which will be just a couple of seconds from now, bear in mind this is all being done on 2 processing cores. This would be a lot faster if you dedicated more cores, but that also assumes that you have more cores to dedicate, so just be mindful of that. So the installation is complete. We're going to continue. We're going to let the installation finish, even though it says, I know it said that it finished the installation, but there's always going to be another second where it removes certain packages, where it installs maybe a couple of last-minute things. And just let that run its course. It's going, come on. It is a bit slow with 2 cores. And let's, oh snap, I gave, oh, sorry, that's Fedora setting. This one, I have only given 2 cores to. That's correct, yep. Okay, and just let it do its thing. Actually, at this point, the fact that it's running the remove live packages, and the status bar isn't going any further, I'm going to say that this is done, because it's waiting for you to eject the disk. But since you don't have a disk installed, oh, there it is. Okay, so now when it gets back to this menu, just power off the machine, go to settings, go to storage, good. And it automatically, actually this time, it automatically removed the disk. So now we just click start. There we go. Hit enter. Just let it load up. Username is root, and the password is password. Sign in. And there you go. Now, first thing you do on a Linux terminal that should be just an immediate habit for anybody who's just getting into it is open up the terminal. In Ubuntu, this is easier. This is just Control-Alt-T. But since this is Kali Linux, it doesn't quite give you that option. Just open up a terminal window, sudo apt get update. Always do this every time you log into a Linux terminal. There's no excuse. Good. And from here, you can do a couple of other things. Kali Linux comes feature packed with just about everything under the sun. But I hope this video was very helpful to the newbie who's trying to get into virtual machines and Linux in general. Linux is a great way to just learn all of this wonderful computer science, and it really cannot be substituted when it comes to especially learning things like coding and other things. All right. Thank you very much for staying through this video. I hope you learned something, and stay tuned for future tutorials. Take care.